Good morning, Bitcoin. Today is Thursday, June 28th, 2018. The price of Bitcoin is $5,902 and appears to be falling. It's a sad day. There's a lot of sad things going on. My God, they've updated it. Five dead, several gravely wounded in a shooting at an Annapolis newspaper in Maryland. Very sad story. But that's not the sad story I'm here to talk to you about. I'm here today to talk to you about writer Harlan Ellison, who is dead at 84. The award-winning fantasy and science fiction writer Harlan Ellison died today at the age of 84. His wife Susan confirmed the news. Ellison edited the influential anthology Dangerous Visions in 1967, and over the course of his storied career had won multiple Nebula, Hugo, Edward Writers Guild of America, and Edgar Allan Poe awards, just to name some of his honors. His biography, A Lit Fuse, The Provocative Life of Harlan Ellison, an Exploration, was published last year. Susan Ellison asked me to announce the passing of writer Harlan Ellison in his sleep earlier today. For a brief time, I was here, and for a brief time, I mattered. Harlan Ellison, 1934 to 2018. Arrangements for a celebration of his life are pending. But I had a show, and I like Harlan Ellison, so I think it's time right now to have a celebration of Harlan Ellison. They're saying in the chat that they've never heard of him, but you might have heard of a little Star Trek episode called City on the Edge of Forever. That's right. Captain Kirk time travels back to the 30s and changes one thing. He saves the life of Edith Keeler. By saving her life, he transforms all of history. Kirk is then sent back one more time, and this time, Edith Keeler must die. It's a fantastic story. I hate to spoil even those parts of it, but this is a Star Trek's from the 60s. We're talking 40, maybe even 60 years old now. You should have seen it by now, but you still have a chance to go on Netflix or whatever you got and see City on the Edge of Forever by Harlan Ellison. Harlan Ellison, very famously kind of a crank. He didn't even like this episode. This is probably the best episode of Star Trek ever. Definitely, it's worthy of a play, worthy of any other television show, or maybe even a movie. And he didn't like it. He didn't like the things they changed. He thought Roddenberry was kind of campy. But what I really like about Harlan Ellison is this essay called The Three Most Important Things in Life. And this essay has a fantastic ending, and it's probably far too long, and I don't have near enough water. It's not going to help if I pour it on myself. It's supposed to go in my mouth. But I'm just going to read it anyway because I have a show and because I can and because I want to celebrate the life of Harlan Ellison, a writer who made me laugh. Mainly in this piece, mainly this piece and the Star Trek episode. I tried to read some of his other work and I couldn't get into it. But this piece specifically really spoke to me, and I hope you guys enjoy it. And you can follow along at home. The Three Most Important Things in Life. This work appears online via a special arrangement with the author, Harlan Ellison. You can thank him by visiting the Herc store. Copying or distributing any part of this piece for personal use, commercial use, or any other use you can come up with is strictly forbidden. Breaking this rule will result in the author coming down on you like the proverbial hand of God, or, barring the author finding out, you being forced to spend 15,000 years in purgatory watching the same 3 episodes of Perfect Strangers. So obviously I'm taking a real risk by reading this piece to you, but I think this piece is that important. The Three Most Important Things in Life by Harlan Ellison. I've looked everywhere, and I'll be damned if I can find it, but I know I read that passage somewhere. I think in Kerouac, but I can't locate it now, so you'll just have to go along with me that it's there. Would I lie to you? It's a scene in which a young supplicant and an aspiring poet Somebody like that seeks out this knowledgeable old philosopher, kind of a Bukowski or Henry Miller figure, in Paris or New York or some such bustling metropolitan situation. And the kid comes to the old guru in his ratty apartment, and he sort of kind of asks him the old saw about the meaning of life. Correction, life. He squats there and says to the old man, "What's it all about? What's it mean, huh?" And the old man purses his lips and beetles his brow. He perceives the kid is really serious about this. It's not just jerk off time. So he nods sagely and clasps his hands behind his back. And he walks to the window and stares out at the deep city for a while. Just sort of kind of ponders for a while. And finally, he turns to the kid and he says, with core seriousness, "You know, there's a lot of bastards out there." Now, I think that's pretty significant, I think. On the other hand, I have never made myself my residence in a stalactite festooned cave high on the northern massif of Chulamonga, Everest to you. I have never even been sought out by fawning sycophants, whimpering to abase themselves before my wisdom, hungering to prostrate themselves and to offer ablutions at the altar of my Delphic insights. In short, unlike the great thinkers of our time who appear regularly on talk shows, Merv Griffin, Debbie Boone, Zsa Zsa Gabor, and Jim Neighbors leap instantly to mind, I doubt that the Oxford Encyclopedia of Philosophy will ever crib from my notes. Nonetheless, having become something of an in-group cult figure among those with a high death wish profile and a taste for cheap thrills, I am often asked, "What's the big secret, Ellison?" At college lectures, for instance, bright-eyed young people, the great hope of our society, come up to me and murmur in reverential tones, "Want to buy a lid of tough Filipino scarlet?" Naturally, I try to demonstrate a certain humility in the face of such trust and innocence. I try to explain that life is real, life is earnest. In my own toe-scuffling fashion, I attempt to encapsulate in 3 or 4 apocryphal phrases the ethical structure of the universe, the better to aid these fine young people as they set out to change the world. And from this long, terrifically fascinating life of encounters and adventures, I have selected 3 examples of what I think are the most important things in life. Notes should be taken. This will count as 60% of your grade. Number 1, sex. I could have started with one of the more esoteric of the 3, but I know your attention span is short. And in lieu of playing The Saints Go Marching In, I decided it was best to catch your notice with instant sleaze. Sex is one of the most important things in life. It comes built into the machine. Understanding sex is real important, you know? And it's not enough just to say, all men are shits, or what the fuck do women want? That's good for openers, but one must press on to deeper insights. As an aid to your greater search, I offer the following antidote from my own humble experience and only minimally exaggerated retelling of the single kinkiest sexual encounter that I ever had. When I got to Los Angeles in 1962, I was well into terminal destitution. Poverty would have been for me a sharp jump into a higher income bracket. Consequently, I wasn't getting laid much. More astute observers than I have charted the correlation between one's D&B rating and one's attraction for members of the same or opposite sex. Anyhow, I met this young woman at Stats Charbroiler one afternoon and somehow conned her into accepting a date. It has been 15 years since that encounter, but I remember her name today as clearly as if it had been intaglioed on my brain with a jackhammer. Brenda. A substantially constructed female person, honey blonde of hair, amber of eye, insucculent of manner, and expansive of bosom. We exchanged pleasantries, and I explained that I was new to LA and was, in fact, a published author. She went for it. I took her phone number and address and promised to pick her up the following Saturday night around 8 p.m. for a rollicking evening of camaraderie and good times, cleverly scaled to my non-existent finances, long walks in the bracing night air, that kind of thing. Came Saturday, and I hand washed the wretched 1951 Ford that had brought me to California from Chicago and New York. I dressed as spiffily as I could manage, aware at all times of the fact that having postponed a good number of meals had dropped my weight to about 90 pounds, and I was beginning to take on the appearance of a card carrying rickets case. I drove to her home, which was in the posh Brentwood section of Beverly Hills. I walked to the ornate apartment door of the Garden Lanai and rang the bell. Nothing happened. I waited and rang again. Nothing happened. Minutes passed, and I began thinking unworthy thoughts about Brenda's ethics. Finally, I heard footsteps from within, and the door was flung open. There stood Brenda in her slip, with machines in her hair. Come in, she said huffily, as if I had interrupted her at the precise moment when she had been decoding the DNA molecule, or something equally as significant. I'm running a little late. I have to finish doing my hair. Well, come in already. I stepped into the foyer, standing on the ribbed plastic runner that stretched out into the distance. As she closed the door behind me, I began to take a step off of the plastic striping so that the door wouldn't hit me. My foot was poised in mid-step as she let out a shriek. Ah, not on the carpet. Mama had the Schwartz in today. I spun, widdershins, barely managing to balance myself on one leg like a flamingo. I steadied myself on the plastic runner and looked to my right, the direction my errant foot would have carried me. There, stretching off to the distant horizon, flooring a living room only smaller, slightly smaller than Bosnia and or Herzegovina, lay the plume-perfect lunatic symbol of the upwardly mobile nouveau-rich household, a white carpet. Deepest pile, a veritable Sargasso seed of insane white carpet. Who but nutcases would carpet a room in which human beings are supposed to relax? In white, for Christ's sake. With a nap pathologically lying all in one direction, clearly having been carpet swept by Nubian slave labor, so it was anal retentively flowing in one unbroken tide. Hours had been spent making sure each bloody fiber lay in that north by northwest direction. Stay on the runner. I won't be long, Brenda commanded. I've got to stay on the runner? Sure, just stand there. I'll be out in a minute. And she vanished, back into the bowels of that cyclopean domicile, leaving me standing frozen and tremulous in my baggy pants while she went off to complete her toilette. The plastic runner extended out beneath my feet, back into the dim and vaulted interior. To my left, a closed door. To my right, the inviolate expanse of white carpeting and a living room in which Xerxes could have easily assembled his armies for an attack on the hot gates. I stood there, shifting from one foot to the other like a grade school troublemaker, waiting for his audience with the principal. And time went by, slowly. I waited and heard nothing from the back of the residence. The living room looked invitingly comfortable with all those massive sofas and the huge baby grand piano. But I had been denied entrance. I felt like Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon standing on the doorway to the antechamber of Tutankhamun's tomb, faunching to enter a space unvisited for those 3,000 years, but fearing the terrible wrath of "Beware all ye who violate this sacred place." Now, I don't know about you, friends, but if you leave me all alone someplace, with nothing to amuse me, for any extended period of time, I will sure as shit get in trouble. And so, possessed by some devil demon from my childhood, I became obsessed by the purity of that goddamned carpet. I stared at its unblemished white expanse, that sea of bleached grass rippling away to forever. And finally, when it was either do something or go bug fuck, I stepped to the edge of the plastic runner, crouched, and jumped as far out onto the carpet as I could. There was no way of knowing where I had come from. My footprints had just magically appeared out there. I hesitated only a moment, and then began scuffing my feet to produce impressions in the carpet. I began spelling the classic Chaucerian fuck in letters 4 feet high in virginal white carpet. And I was just putting the exclamation mark on when I heard a strangled "ah" behind me. I turned and there stood the missing Brenda, looking really pretty terrific, but with this, how shall I put it, green expression on her face. Oh, Jesus. Oh, my God. Oh, shit. My mother will kill me. And she ran off, leaving me standing there rather shamefaced, wondering just which mental gargoyle had taken possession of the cathedral of my mind, knowing that there was no way I was going to get laid. Then, in a moment, here she came, schlepping a carpet sweeper, not a vacuum cleaner, just one of your basic hand-pushed carpet sweepers. And she starts sweeping the nap back north by northwest. And I watched this demented scene for about 30 seconds until it got more than I could handle. And I yelled at her, "This is nuts. How can you be a slave to a fucking carpet?" But she was in the grip of more powerful forces than my charisma. She was under the unbreakable spell of toilet training. And if the apocalypse had come along just then, she'd still have finished laying that nap back. I went crazy. I grabbed for the sweeper. She pirouetted out of my reach. She never broke stroke. I lunged for her again and got my hands around the sweeper. We struggled back and forth across the living room, caroming off the furniture, lousing up the carpet worse than before. She fought like one of those lady barbarians out of a Conan adventure, punching and kicking. Then the sweeper went that way, and we went this way, and we fell over and wrestled over and over across the floor, thumping our heads and legs over and over, and I came up on top of her for a minute and pinned her arms and stared down at her, trying to catch my breath. And in that instant, I perceived a mad light glowing out of her eyes, and she murmured huskily, "Hit me." Oh, shit. Now, you got to understand, I'm a quiet, well-mannered Jewish kid from Ohio. Not even years sunk to the hips in the flesh pots of New York City, Chicago, London, and Billings, Montana, have been able to sully the rigidly puritanical morals that have led me to the pinnacle of success and clear complexion that you see before you today. To put it simply, I was terrified. After all that time, at long last, despite my best effort at avoidance, I had encountered one of those kind of ladies. Beg pardon? I said weakly. "Hit me," she said again. The light in her eyes strobed. Hit you? And punch me around a little bit. I love it. Don't leave marks. Just hurt me some. Oh, shit. She was watching me, naked lust in her face, her lips wet with unconcealed desire. Nice, quiet Jewish kid from Ohio. But what the hell? I'm adaptable. Bogart asserted himself. My voice dropped four octaves. "You like a little smacking around, right, sweetheart?" She nodded, bonking her head on the carpet. "Okay," I said roughly. "Get naked." She looked troubled for a moment. "Naked?" "Now," I said, my voice a brutal rasp. I got off her. I stood over her as she stripped out of her clothes. My eyes slitted and my jaw tensed. I watched silently. When she was naked, and pretty terrific she was, I might add, I said, "Okay, lie on your back." She lay down again. For a crazed moment, I wanted to tell her to make an angel, the way we used to do it back when there was a heavy snow in Ohio. You lie on your back and flap your arms up and down, making angel wings. But I didn't. That would have been really crazy. The heavy drapes on the living room windows were secured by thick gold cord ropes with tassels. I unhooked 4 of them. I wrapped one around her left leg, secured it, and tied one leg to the leg of the baby grand piano. Then I did the same to her right leg and attached it to the piano at the other side. Then one arm stretched above her head and fastened to a leg of the massive sectional sofa, the other arm to another post of the sofa. She was spread-eagled, right in the middle of the word fuck, without the exclamation mark. Out flat on her back, her perspiring body trembling with barely restrained passion. "Can you move?" She tried, then shook her head. "Tied down tight?" Can't get loose?" She nodded again, breathing raggedly. "Terrific," I said, heading for the door. "Say hello to your mama for me and thank her for the chicken soup." And I ran for my life. All I could think of is when her mother got home that night, found her baby girl staked out like a gazelle at the waterhole, took one look at this monstrous scene, and started screaming, "My carpet!" You ask me if sex is one of the most important things in life? Absolutely. But the lack of it is even likelier to drive you nuts. Number 2, violence. Not the real pallid nonsense Starsky and Hutch indulge in every week. Real violence. Sudden, inexplicable, ghastly. How seldom we see it. How unhinged we become in the face of it. Because when it really happens, when it manifests itself on its most primitive, amoral level, we understand just how fragile is the tissue of social behavior. In a life singularly filled with violence, only one sticks out with even close competition as the most horrendously violent moment I ever witnessed. I'll tell it briefly. Even today, years later, my blood runs cold remembering. New York City, early 70s, maybe 73 or 74. I was in the city on business. Business taken care of, I got together with a friend, a writer from Texas who loves movies as much and as indiscriminately as I do. The ritual, the movie crawl. Load up on junk food, start at the first movie theater on the downtown side of 42nd Street, and just work our way from Times Square to 8th Avenue, cross the street, and work our way back to Times Square. Days, endless days, 24, 36, 48 hours in straight time in the dark. We eat in there, sleep in there, piss and daydream in there. Hot dogs, popcorn, slabs of cheese, munchies, French bread, any damn thing. And we see them all. The good flicks, the bad flicks, the kung fu operas, the porn jobs, the Superfly Stomp the Patty flicks. All of them, one after another, until our eyes turn to poached eggs, staggering from theater to theater like refugees from a Macau opium den. I don't remember the name of the particular theater, but it was on the uptown side of 42nd Street, close to Broadway. It was something like 4 in the morning. My buddy and I were almost totally cacked out. I remember the double bill, however. The lower half, the B feature, was Fear is the Key, a really dreadful action-adventure turkey based upon the crummy Alistair MacLean novel. The main feature was Save the Tiger, a contemporary drama starring Jack Lemmon. He won the Oscar for the role in that film. And there we slumped, way the hell up in the balcony, our knees jammed under our chins, best seats in an almost empty house. 4 a.m. 2 rows behind us, and it was very steep up there. What I'm talking here is damn near perpendicular. Some black dude was juiced out asleep, lying across 3 or 4 seats, snoring. My buddy, the Texas writer, is dead asleep, having polished off a recent meal of 3 boxes of Good and Plenty and a frozen chocolate-covered banana on a stick. And blessedly, Fear is the Key ends, and Save the Tiger begins. About 10 minutes into this serious, sensitive study of a garment center guy who's killing himself with floating ethics, and from the very first row of the balcony below and to the right of us, but still very high above the floor of the theater, I hear a shrieky black voice start mouthing off. Dialogue straight out of a $100 misunderstanding. "Motherfucker. Goddamn motherfucking piece of shit. Dumb son bitch cum sucking garbage piece of shit. Leroy. You son bitch. N-word. Prick Leroy. Lee, get the fuck out of here, Leroy." Clearly, the critic in the front row of the balcony had found this deeply penetrating study of middle-class morality, as seen through the dissolution of Jack Lemmon's knockoff sweatshop, less than relevant to his existence, as a mid-20th century denizen of the shitty slum which whence we would wend his way back once the stupid, another offensive word, about this motherfucking honk patty bastards ended, which wasn't soon enough for him. Leroy. I had the feeling that Leroy was the terminal case lying over the seats 2 rows below us. Out of it. Well, I peer through the gloom and see the dude down there in the front row of the balcony, his feet up on the brass rail, his partner beside him, silently watching the film, but not stopping the noise. And I watched the two of them for a little while, hoping the third member of group, good old Leroy, will bestir his ass and go rejoin them there, Sepia Athos and Porthos, and maybe just vacate the site quickly so I can watch the goddamn motherfucking movie. But no such luck. The critic only gets wonkier, yelling at the top of his lungs. Leroy doesn't twitch a bum. And just as the critic is reaching a pitch that will cause sonic tremors, squealing sunbish and motherfucker at the top of his lungs, from behind me, I hear the voice of doom. Shut your face, N-word, before I come down there and kill you. Pause with me for a nano instant. This was not one of those angrily shouted shut-ups one encounters all too frequently these days in pillbox-sized cinema 1, 2, 3, 4 closets with slope-browed, protagonist-jawed pimple brains who jabber endlessly as though they were still in front of the tube in their living room. This was, trust me, the most blood-curdling, threatening voice I had ever heard. It was the kind of voice one suspected would accompany the body attached to the moving figure, writing "Men, men, tekel" in letters of fire. This was an abominable snowman, a tyrannosaurus, a behemoth, a stone-righteous motherfucking killer. Deep, resonant, commanding, powerful, and very, very black. I don't want to belabor this, but whoever or whatever was sitting back up there behind my Texas buddy and I, it was bad. Beside me, I felt the hand of my Texican partner on my wrist. Softly, he asked, "What the fuck was that?" "Voice of doom," I said. "Pretend we're black. Better still, pretend we're at another theater." All of this happened in a second, and only an idiot would have talked back to the owner of that voice. Guess whose name was in the envelope with the category of most outstanding performance by an idiot? You get it. Leroy, with the scoop shovel mouth. Is violence important in this life? The critic started shrieking. Who said that? Who said that goddamn shit to me? You're gonna come down here, N-word? I'm gonna cut you. I'm gonna cut you, N-word motherfucker. And he did go on and on and on. Oh shit, I murmured, slumping down even deeper in the seat, till my knees were up around my ears like a grasshopper. Besides me, my Texican buddy was praying in high church Latin, Yiddish, and Sufi, all at the same time. I do believe that the Joker down in the front row of that cockroach-written movie house was the single dumbest son of a bitch I have ever encountered. And what happened next was the swiftest, most deadly moment of violence I have ever seen. Motormouth was still working over the conjugation of to cut when suddenly, and without warning, there was a rush of wind past me, down those steep steps. Fast, fast, so damn fast, I couldn't make it out whether it was a human or a yeti, or simply some terrifying force of nature. And all I saw was a dark blur as something big went smoothly down to that front row. Something gigantic moved into that row. And that stupid son of a bitch Joker just stood up, still working his wet jaw, as if he could do something against that huge dude coming down to silence him. And that monstrous black fury just grabbed Motormouth by the shirt front and yanked and pitched him head first over the rail. I heard a terrifying scream as the guy fell, and then a sickening crack, like the snapping of a Tang Dynasty chopstick. And then there was silence. The only sounds were Jack Lemmon talking about what emotional violence he was suffering. Shut up, Lemmon. No one in the theater moved. There weren't that many people anyhow, just my buddy and sleeping Leroy and the buddy of the guy who's taken the dive, and that humongous shape in the balcony. And if there was anyone down below, they weren't saying anything. The diver's buddy didn't move or look around or say a word. He just sat there looking straight ahead, as if he could not have possibly found anything more interesting in the universe to think about than Jack Lemmon's problems. The dark shape moved back up the aisle. I didn't look left or right. I saw nothing, Jim, nothing. And it went up past me and was gone. I watched that entire flick in silence. No one moved to see if the diver was still alive. After a moment's wait, the diver's buddy slipped out of the balcony like oil washing down a gutter and was gone. From below, nothing. And when the film was finished and the lights came up, we rose and turned slowly. The balcony was empty. Leroy was still tabula rasa. Just us, all alone. I looked at my buddy from Texas and he looked at me. And without saying a word, we walked down that precarious stairway and came to the railing and peered over. The diver lay across the back of a shattered seat. He was bent double, stomach up. His spine was broken. He didn't move. The theater was empty. We walked back up the aisle through the upper vestibule, down the winding staircase, into the lobby, and out. We didn't look back. No one could help the diver. We wanted to get away. We never spoke of it to each other. It was sudden. Not a word. Not a second threat. No false heroics like two stumblebums in an alley outside a bar. No fainting and no swinging. He just threw him, launched him out into eternity, and walked away from it because he was being disturbed in a movie. Violence, real violence, not the Jack Armstrong nonsense we all play act at, genuine, mindless violence is still very important because there is no knowing when it will strike and there is no escape from it. I warn you, it's terrible. Number 3, by Harlan Ellison, and this might be the best part, labor relations. At least half of our waking life is spent trying to make ends meet, slouching after the buck, keeping the rain off our heads. That means earning a living. Aren't you glad I clarified it for you? And whether you're on the paycheck or self-employed, whether you wait in line for the dole or cat burglar through windows in the wee hours, relations with them as has the money are vital. Not getting the employer pissed off. Maintaining a posture that makes you indispensable cannot be too strenuously stressed. One of the most important lessons one can learn in this tragic life, therefore, is what it takes to stay employed. And since almost any job will eventually drive you to erratic behavior, thus precipitating getting your tuchus laid off, I offer the following heart-rendering antidote from my virtually cornucopial stock of life experiences as a classic example of what not to do. One day, about 10 years ago, I was sitting in this little treehouse I rented in Beverly Glen, a sort of arboreal Bambiland section of Los Angeles, just on the Tobacco Road side of Bel Air and Beverly Hills. What I'm talking here is an artsy crafty but poor as a shul mouse. A shul is a synagogue. As a Jew, I'm not allowed to have church mice, but that's okay. They're traff. Really a treehouse. I'm not making this up, see? Because half the house sat on a rock ledge up a private little street called Bushrod Lane that was mostly kind of a paved pathway, better suited to fugitives from a James Fenimore Cooper book than this upwardly struggling young writer trying to bludgeon his way into movies. And the other half of the treehouse, that is, am I going too fast for you? Was in the crotch of a big eucalyptus tree, and it only cost me $135 a month. Which back then, at a time before everything was crazy in what it terms it costs to live decently these days, and $135 was not the biggest rent you could pay, but it wasn't all that cushy either. And so I was sitting there when the phone rang, and it was Marty the agent, and he says to me, "Walt Disney wants you." Now, I don't know what you think constitutes an ominous remark, but as Walt Disney had gone to collect his reward from the great consortium organizer in the sky at least 2 years prior to the phone call from Marty the agent, immediate thoughts of some Lovecraftian horror beckoning to me from the crypt "Ooh, Walt wants you," went pitter-pattering through my tiny brain. But as it turned out, I was never to find out if there was truth to the much bandied underground rumor that Walt had been flash frozen cryogenically, with an eye to restoring him in the 25th century, or at worst, stuffing him and putting him on display like Trigger. What it boiled down to, improbably, is that someone had read some of my science fiction stories somewhere and thought I'd be a terrific little fella to have a kind of sort of sci-fi film Disney was thinking of making. My first reaction to Disney Wants You was horror and then stark amazement. "There's been a mistake," I said to Marty the agent. "I'm a crazed radical, bomb throwing loon who writes stories about things that come up out of the toilets and bite off babies' asses. Are you sure they don't want Bob Ellison? He writes comedy, very clean cut guy, drives a late model car, shaves regularly, never says fuck in mixed company. You sure they mean me, Marty? I'm Harlan Ellison, remember? The one with a hook for a hand." "No," says Marty the agent, who had been my theatrical agent, as opposed to my literary agent, who is Bob the agent, as well as my friend for over 15 years. "No, they have clearly lost their minds, and they want you. And I've made a nice little week-to-week deal with you with a guaranteed 6 and options." And he named a figure that might not purchase San Simeon in these crazy days of lettuce going for $3 a head, but back then, 10 years ago, was more money than anyone had ever offered me for anything, including my body. "Contracts are coming," Marty said, "but go over to the Disney studio tomorrow morning. They have an office for you." I was in heaven. So, okay, it wasn't writing the great American cinematic answer to Potemkin, but so what? I was on my way. I was going to work in the studio. It was the big time. And just to get up in the part of a successful scenarios, I dragged out my complete collection of Uncle Scrooge McDuck comics and reread them all till the night had passed away and the morning had come. I dressed smartly, put on the one tie I owned, looked at myself in the mirror before leaving the treehouse, and went back in and took off the tie and put on a shirt first. Okay, so I was excited. Shoot me. I drove out the Ventura Freeway to the Buena Vista exit, drove up to the front gate in the disreputable 1950 Ford I mentioned earlier, which hadn't been washed in so long that strangers wrote "cleanliness is next to godliness" obscenities in the dirt, and gave my name to the spiffy guard at the kiosk. "Oh, yes, sir, Mr. Ellison," he said, validating my existence. "Your office is in the writer's building." I beamed. "How do I get there?" I asked. He smiled exactly the same smile as Doc from the Seven Dwarfs fame and said, "Well, you drive in here and you take the first left. That's Mickey Mouse Avenue. Then you go down Mickey Mouse Avenue until you get to Thumper Boulevard. Turn right on Thumper to Clarabelle Cow Way and take another left. Go straight down Clarabelle Cow Way until you hit the corner of Horace Horsecollar Drive. And the writer's building is the second building on your right." I think I nodded dumbly, refusing to believe what I had just been told. But I drove in, and sure as shit, there was Mickey Mouse Avenue and Thumper Boulevard and all the rest of them. And I said to myself, "Ellison, you have fallen down a rabbit hole, kid." But right there in front of the building to which I'd been directed was a parking slot that said H. Ellison. Right there on the blacktop, between the thick, light white lines, some industrious auto animatronic robot, possibly cobbled up in the image of Matisse or Linder, had stenciled my name for eternity, or 6 weeks with options, whatever came first. To those of you out there in the great American heartland, that might not be such a significant thing. But here in the world of studio synecdoches, a parking space of one's own is dearer to the heart than never being put on hold when calling the networks. I know Sammy Glip Menakes who have been given up perks and titles and even Bigelow on the floor just for a parking space with the name therein. So it had to be it. Authentication of my elevated status in the universe of soon-to-be hot stuff. I walked into the building, and on the register I found my name and office number. Walked upstairs, followed the numbers till I found my office, and opened the door. It was a two-room suite with bathroom. The room I entered was the antechamber, and there, sitting behind her desk, reading from a paperback nurse novel, was my secretary. No, change that from two. You should have seen her. This remarkable creature was so clean I could see dust motes taking 90-degree turns as they fell, just so they wouldn't mar her perfection. A smile that would solve all the energy dilemmas of the TVA, Peter Pan collar on the blouse, Malibu blonde, periwinkle blue eyes, and a goyish nose that would make Streisand climb a wall of freshly minted six-pack of dimples, most of which were visible. "May I help you?" she said. You're probably too young to remember, but the part of Adelaide in the original stage production of Guys and Dolls was played by Vivian Blaine, an accomplished actress who had the most amazing dumb blonde voice ever bottled. Not even Julie Holliday in Born Yesterday could approach the level of stupidity orally conveyed by Miss Blaine's rendition of the nitwit. Only once in the more than a quarter century since Guys and Dolls opened on Broadway had I heard a voice, male or female, that rivaled for the strident, full out dumbness, the voice of Adelaide. "May I help you?" she said. I'm Harlan Ellison," I replied. "I think this is my office." Such instant attentiveness, such perky willingness to serve. We don't do floors or windows. Could she get me coffee? Could she type some script? Could she file some reports? Could she read my tarot? I pointed out that I was just arriving and that it was my first day on the job, since I had no idea what I was doing, nor even what the nature of my project was to be. I really only needed one bit of assistance. "Is that my office in there?" She indicated that the connected room was, in fact, the holiest of holies, where she was certain I would create great moments in cinematic history. I thanked her, suggested she return to the contremps of nurse and doctor, and advanced, post-nasal drip, and I'd call her when I needed her. In the background, I heard mental riffs by Dan Hicks and his hot licks. I went into my office. They could have staged the World Cup soccer matches in there. One sofa, too short to sleep on, one wall of bookcases empty save for a well-thumbed copy of the 1948 World Almanac, one framed painting depicting Beanfield hands laboring under a blistering sun. I wondered if that was intended by the management as metaphor. One desk the size of battleship Potemkin, and I wondered if that was intended by the management as metaphor. One typing table supporting an enormous IBM Selectric, already humming with life. One roll-around typing chair. And on the desk, an even dozen number 2 Dixon Ticonderoga pencils, sharpened to such piercing sharpness that they seemed to strobe off into invisibility at the points. Tony Curtis could have dueled with those pencils. I didn't have the heart to tell anyone I typed manuscripts straight into the machine. My handwriting is in the top 10% of the top percentile of illegible scrawls. I sat down and waited for someone to come and tell me what they wanted me to write, to tell me at least the name of the picture. But an hour went by and nothing happened. As I've pointed out earlier, left to my own devices, I get into trouble, deep trouble. So, bored out of my brain, I rose and went into the office where Barbie sat with furrowed brow, pondering the mysteries of infections and abscesses of the submaxillary paratroid gland, and I said, "I'm going to look around. Be back in a bit." The smile fried my eyeballs like a ping-pong ball in a cyclotron, and I stumbled into the hall. I started checking out the other offices, and to my utter delight, there were at least half a dozen writers I knew, ensconced in plaza suites similar to mine. The wonderful thing about it is that most of them were loons like me. I'd name them, but since most of you can't even remember the names of or authors of books, names of scenarios like Albert Allay and John D.F. Black and Mary C. McCall Jr. won't mean shit to you. Suffice to say, we all found ourselves gathered in John's office, shucking and jiving until almost noon, at which point someone said, "Okay, let's break for lunch." I thought this was a terrific idea, having put an exhausting 3 hours working in the Disney vineyards. So we went to the commissary and shoved in around the writer's table. What I did not know is that the writer's table was right behind the producer's banquette. That was my first big mistake. And as it turned out, it was also my last big mistake. Oh, what fun sitting there with intellectual companions, cutting up touches and laughing about the drolleries. Born again, the Algonquin Round Table, wit beyond compare, and naturally, as the youngest member of the group, striving to make my mark as worthy of their camaraderie, their respect, I suggested a droll, witty, lunchtime conceit. Two things you must know. First, I do a terrific Mickey Mouse impersonation, absolutely phonographically perfect. If the publishers of this book had the money, they ought to bind in a record, one of those little plastic jobbies, so you could hear my spectacular Mickey impression. When I tell this anecdote in person, it really enhances a lot, but just pretend you can hear it, okay? The second thing you need to know is that the producer's banquet had filled up with Roy Disney and the other heads of the studio behind me, a fact of which I was unaware, a fact no one bothered to impart. At the top of my voice, I suggested, "Hey, what a kick. Why don't we do a Disney porn flick?" Everyone smiled. "It'll be terrific," I said, loudly. I mean, everyone knows, for instance, that Tinkerbell does it. What they don't know is how she does it. They all looked at me expectantly. "She flies up to the head of the penis and flaps her wings like crazy," I said, proud as hell of myself for this little bit of fantasy. Everyone chuckled. I went on, oblivious to the sudden hush all around me in the commissary. "I'll be Mickey, and I'll be the director. John, you do a good Donald. You can be the male porn lead, sort of a duck-style Harry Reams. Mary, you can be Minnie, the female lead. And Albert, you can be Goofy. And Goofy, of course, is the producer." Their smiles were frozen, the way smiles of bit players get frozen when they see the monster coming up from behind them, behind the hero in a horror flick. Hey, gang, I squeaked in my terrifically accurate Mickey voice. "Everyone ready to shoot the ultimate Disney flick? The film that rips the lid off the goody two-twos hypocrisy that lies sweltering beneath the surface of G-rated true life adventures. Okay, guys, let's see that handheld Aeroflex down there between Minnie's legs. I want to see close-ups of the quivering labia." A silence as deep as that at the bottom of the Cayman Trench. I went on oblivious, carried along by my enthusiasm. In Donald Duck's quack, I said, "Goddamn son of a bitch! Pluto, get out of here! You're steaming up the lens!" And Goofy, in the dumbest voice possible, I said, "Yuck, yuck. Hey, fellas, I'm a highly claimed, extremely inept producer person. Can I play too?" As Mickey, "Fuck off, Goofy. Get those 7 dwarfs in here. I don't care if they want to gangbang a mouse. Tell them they're under contract. And for Christ's sakes, Minnie, will you take off those goddamn shoes?" The meal came. Everyone addressed their plates like inmates of the Gulag Archipelago. When lunch was over, everyone vanished very quickly. I was confused, but felt good. What a nice little shtick I'd invented. Wished they'd joined in. Oh well. Went back to my office. Noticed first that my name had been whited out in the parking slot. Upstairs, the secretary and her paperback was gone. On my desk, 12 sharpened number 2 Dixon Ticonderoga pencils and a pink slip. I had been fired after working for the Disney Empire for a total of 4 hours, including lunch. The lessons here cannot be avoided. Big business is humorless. And at Disney, nobody fucks with the mouse. It's a little piece by writer Harlan Ellison, who passed away today at the age of 84. He wrote the Star Trek episode, The City on the Edge of Forever. It's an amazing episode. Several other science fiction stories and books. But especially, I like this one, which he called The 3 Most Important Things in Life by Harlan Ellison. The price of Bitcoin is $5,934. Thanks so much for watching, and rest in peace, Harlan Ellison.